And we talked last year. If y'all will remember last year when we were at the strategic planning meeting, we brought an idea to City Council for a street use fee. And so as we did that, and we looked at that last year, and we talked through it kind of in a very high level to look at the proposed street use fee. Council gave staff direction to kind of delve into it a little bit further and see what that could look like for the city of San Angelo and what that could possibly be. And so we did that. And so we engaged Kimley Horn, an engineering design firm, or an engineering firm that has specialized. Well, I don't say specialized, but they have done several of these and worked with several other municipalities around to establish these street use fees. Here are some of the examples of the other cities, somewhat similar size, some smaller, definitely like Snyder, and then of course Corpus Christi and some of those that are much bigger. But as we look at them, it's kind of across the board is what the cities are doing and what they're and how they're starting to engage in these type of street use fees. And the one that we looked at fairly closely was Abilene, and we brought that to y'all's attention last year. Abilene is the one that is probably the closest to not only and I guess in physical relationship, but also in size and kind of how they're set up and how they work. And so we looked at theirs. We looked at their program that they initiated, and have visited with them and talked to them about the successes that they are seeing with their program. And basically, they used theirs as to get started in the maintenance, as to where our city council had stepped up several years before that with our maintenance program. And so Abilene is using theirs as a maintenance program, but they have seen that as such a success that they're actually looking to maybe want to expand their program into more of to expand it to start addressing rehabilitation and reconstruction of their roadways as well too, not just maintenance. So. As we look at that, we're seeing other communities that have implemented this and are seeing definite benefits across their cities as they move forward. And kind of going through it and kind of some of the benefits that we see from city staff as we're looking at it. It continues to provide that funding. We know we're going to get to the end of the bond funding before long, and then trying to figure out. What's that next step then? And how are we going to continue this program and try to get on the proactive side instead of the reactive side of street construction and street maintenance? And as we look at it, one of the things that City Council has been adamant on is not increasing property tax. And so we do not want to increase the property tax. And so as well, and I mean, that's from, not only when the economic development guys and Guy and his bunch when they're going out, and Michael Looney and his bunch when they're going out and trying to bring businesses in, if businesses are seeing your property taxes increase, they're not going to be enticed or want to come to town. And so again, there's multiple reasons for not increasing the property tax rate to address this as well. And there are concerns about how much debt we're adding to our books, and we don't want to continue to keep adding debt. So this fee would be one possible way not to do that, not to add debt, not to increase your property tax rate. And as you're going through and some of the things that we could do with these funding that's possible, kind of how we set up right now, council's kind of said somewhere between $4 and $5 million is kind of would be a target for us to look at. And so that's kind of the target that we've worked through. And Patrick here in a minute is going to kind of go through the inner workings of how it would work and how it would look. But as we're going through this and we're looking, one of our thoughts is to bring in an in-house mill and overlay crew. If we're going to actually get out, because we cannot, I don't believe, it's my personal opinion, I do not believe that we could ever borrow enough money to address every street in town. But if we start bringing some of this in-house and we can start directing it in-house, and I believe we can do a lot of this work, especially the rehabilitation portion of it, I believe we can do a lot of that in-house at a lower cost and more efficiently. And bringing that in-house will also give us flexibility to go where we need to go, when we need to go, versus being tied to a contract. That being said, there are going to be those things that we are not going to be able to do in-house. Reconstruction, full depth reconstruction, or the FDR process that we're doing out here on Bell Street. Those are things when roads have failed, we're not going to be able to rehabilitate those. So this money could also be pay-as-you-go capital to contract out some of those services that we're still not going to be on it, or we're not going to be able to do in-house. And then also when we're looking at it, being able to, one, possibly as we're looking at these granting opportunities, give us a source for match money for these grants. Because a lot of these grants that are going to come out are going to be 80-20 matches or 70-30 matches. And we are going to have dollars here in the city for us to be able to take advantage of those grant dollars. So again, it does that. And then two, with the street use, it's based on it's based on a trip factor and trip generators. And so when you apply it in that manner across the board, it's equitable across all land uses, all business types, and all sectors of the community. So when you look at it from that, it's a more equitable way of putting or basically acquiring the funding you need to take care of the degradation of the pavement, based on how much it's, the how much money you're generating will be based off your trip generation. How many, if you're a business, how many, and Patrick will go through the details here in just a second, just kind of a high-level view here. But if your business, typically generates, 5,000 trips a day, you're going to be paying more than somebody that, only generates 5 trips a day. So again, it's the trip generation and the degradation of the pavement's kind of linear in how it's set up and designed. And so as we move across, we will let Patrick kind of chime in here and start and kind of go through the details of how this program would work.
Let's stop right now and just see if council has any questions that they want to ask at this point in the presentation before Patrick takes over. Go, please. Yeah.
I don't fundamentally disagree with this concept, and I don't think anyone else up here does, although I won't speak for them. But I think that the elephant in the room is that the community needs to be brought along slowly on any kind of cost increase, especially right on the heels of their tax bills. So I think my concern is one of timing, and I just want to put that out there so that it's part of the conversation. I don't know how we address that. I don't know if it's a town hall, but I think that council needs to hear what the public has to say about this. And of course, we all understand that the amount that will be added potentially to our bills is the cost of a hamburger and a Coke, but there's something about the fact that it's news right now after news that was startling to a lot of people.
Yes, ma'am. And again, we're bringing this just as a proposal, and it was something we've been asked to look at over time. Again,
You presented it last year.
Yes, I did.
As part of our strategic planning, and it was at that point in time we said just continue to pursue it. So meaning we don't have enough information to start immediately, but continue to pursue it. And the other issue, which you can address in a minute, and when you get through with this, is somehow because it's proposed that it would be on the water bill, everybody thinks it's water increases, just as people look at that water bill and think it's expensive water, but what it is, it's many things on that water bill because it's the water, it's the sewer, it's the trash, and it's stormwater. And so the reason for using the water bill as the means of which to charge folks, if you will, can you explain that and the reason behind that?
Yes, ma'am. We can touch on it here in a minute. We have it kind of
Whenever
more towards the end
it's
of the process.
appropriate.
Okay, and we can address that. But again, it does. It's one, the utility bill is already established. It's already an established means by which we send out a bill every month. Instead of creating 4 bills or 5 bills that we're sending out, we just put all the utilities that we charge on one statement. So it's ease of that. And then also, if if it's not set up correctly, there's no way to I'm trying to think. There's no way to collect on that in such a manner that it's enforceable, basically. And so again, we have to have that set up in the way we do it. And again, there is no specific time or nothing. We're just bringing this forward for council to look at, for give us feedback. Is it good? Is it bad? I mean, do you not like how it's set up or the way it's set up? And so again, we're just trying to garner feedback right now, not necessarily try to,
And we're not taking a vote today. This
That's
is a
correct.
presentation only, an opportunity to learn more, to ask the questions, so that you can answer your constituents' issues or challenges or explain it better. So use this as a learning situation for all of us.
And again, we'll kind of go through some more things, and we definitely do need council's feedback on some of these items as well too, because again, we're not at the final stages of this. We're still kind of mid-level, working through the details, and so again, we need to get council feedback and work our way through.
Harry, do you have a question or comment?
I just have a comment, and that is, I think the proposed direction that we're going with this, if we decide to do this, has a lot of benefits. First of all, we can put some city employees back on the roads, doing what I think we can do from a maintenance standpoint, and small reconstruction that will save the taxpayers dollars in the long run. And so, from my perspective, this investment, I think, will pay benefits. So I think the concept, whether we stay with 675 or some of those other numbers, is not anything I'm worried about discussing today. But I think the concept will ultimately save taxpayer dollars, and so I think it's a good concept.
Lucy?
I just have a quick question. Shane, how did you come up with 675?
We based a lot of what we did off of other cities' numbers that not only we looked at, but also our consultant looked at. And so these numbers are based a lot on what other cities are doing. So, and again, some of them are tweaked a little bit. Some of our numbers are tweaked a little bit to kind of work for the city and kind of what council's target number was for us to look at. And so some of those numbers are tweaked. But again, we based a lot of this stuff on what other cities have already done and established.
You said Abilene was already doing this.
Correct. And that all those list of cities I had up on the screen, yes, are currently in the
And
program.
my question is, and how much money are they bringing in? Say, for instance, just Abilene per year.
I believe it
However
was.
long they've been doing it.
I think their dollar amount per person is larger than this proposal, but I think 6 to 7 million.
Abilene's bringing in right at 5 million, just over 5 million on with their fee. And again, theirs is for maintenance activities, so they're chip seal and stuff like that. So that's what they're bringing in.
But, and again, as we kind of go through the workings of kind of how we have it laid out, and based on input from our consultant that we worked with, and again based on what we saw in other cities, because Abilene, I believe, is 675. Is that where Abilene?
675 is
Yeah.
exactly where they're at.
And so that's exactly where they're at in other cities. And every city has their own nuances to their program, and so you kind of define your program based on the needs of your city and how their city councils wanted it set up. So
They instituted it about 3 years ago, and they've gone back and they're updating it and going back for, I think, larger dollars and more comprehensive thing. So they're on their second round of implementing a change to it, something like that.
yep, they're starting to look again. As I mentioned earlier, they feel they've had such success that with this program that they want to actually expand the program that they have into a rehabilitation and reconstruction program as well, a lot like what we were starting to do with our bond funding. And so, and again, but I think as we start looking at some of these, like Harry stated just a minute ago, bringing some of these things back in-house and doing some of those maintenance activities that we can do in-house, just looking at what $4 to $5 million a year could do, somewhere in that range. I think of it, I think of it in individual streets, and not everybody may be familiar with the street, but if you look at Avenue L or Avenue J, one of those type streets, and that act as a minor collector in the Santa Rita neighborhood, if you look at something like that, if we brought an in-house crew kind of with those kind of funds available, we could probably see doing an entire street section like that 4 or 5 times over in a year. So you're starting to see some of those minor collectors and some of those smaller roads within our neighborhoods that handle a lot of daily traffic, to where we can improve those. We could do improvements in-house, and again, we could do a lot more. And again, the flexibility of it is what I think is so key to that. So
I think the toughest nut to crack on this is equitability. And I assume you're taking some information from Abilene on how you divide up this pie so that the public feels as though it's done fairly across the board. I'd suspect that the next meeting we have, and people are talking about that in public, that's where we're going to get some important inputs about how they think this ought to be handled in terms of who's paying what.
yes, sir. And Patrick's fixing to get into that. So and it'll kind of show and break down how all that works. And so I'll let Patrick take it away.
Right, so after our strategic planning workshop last year, we did engage with Kimley Horn, like Shane was talking about, and started to develop a fee structure that was something that for San Angelo and how our uniqueness. So what they developed was a structure that basically had 2 categories. You had a residential category and you had a non-residential category. So on your screen there, you're looking at the residential side of the pie here. So for a single-family residential, which is a typical home, you'd be looking at a flat rate of $6.75 per month. On the other side, there's multifamily as part of that residential, and so you're talking about apartment complexes, townhomes, duplexes in that category, and what the consultants proposed was $6 per dwelling unit on that. So if an apartment complex has 100 apartments, it'd be 6 times 100 per month for that particular apartment complex. So that's the residential side. So the residential side is very, very easy and easy to understand. But for non-residential, what we didn't want to do is just propose a flat fixed rate for like we did on residential properties, because the sheer range of different properties and commercial entities in San Angelo just warranted a range of categories and fee structures as well on that. So along with that, there's a calculation that we used in order to determine exactly what fee a particular entity would be charged. So starting with that, we reached back to a nationally published manual, the Institute of Traffic Engineers Trip Generation Manual. That's a big name and it's a big book. So basically what that book does is it goes in and it categorizes every type of business in the United States. And for each of that type of business, they generally tag a number in there for the amount of trips that particular business type would generate. And so the easy way to understand this is to walk through an example with you. And so that's kind of what we have on our screen. So let me kind of talk you through how that equation plays out. So if you look at a particular entity and we start with the business classification. So in this case, we're looking at like a restaurant, a gym, a salon, something like that. So you see there's a gym up there. And that is then classified into a land use category that is stemmed from that ITE manual. The land use category, again, takes it from a gym to a health or fitness club. From there, that land use category, within that same manual, you have a development unit. So for each land use category, there's a multiplier or development unit in there. So whether that's square footage, whether that's number of acres, whether that's number of fueling items, whatever that particular business classification is in its niche, that has a particular development unit. So in the case of a gym, it's based on per square feet. So per 1,000 square feet, you have a trip factor. And so that's the number of trips that's generated per 1,000 square feet for that particular gym. So if you do the math kind of there, for example, a 3,000 square foot gym classified as an athletic club, 3,000 divided by the 1,000 per square feet gives you 3 times the trip factor of 4.52. gives you a sum of 13.56. So then you move over into that fee schedule over there, and there's a range there between the 10 and 15 that 13.56 falls within, classified as a C3, which ultimately is $45 there. Now there's a table all the way to the right there that we use, that the consultants came up with as a way to expand that into the larger entities. So you're really talking about your higher use categories. So if we didn't have the multiplier, you're looking at a $75 max fee as proposed right now. But what that multiplier does is you take it, and anything between, as it's shown on the screen there, 0 and 300 would be multiplied by 1. Between 300 and 600 would be multiplied by 2. So $75, $150, $225 is kind of how that plays out. So based on what the consultants came up with, when they looked at San Angelo, they took the tens of thousands of different business types that are in this manual, and they pared that down to 46 land use categories that basically encompass almost every business entity in San Angelo. So every non-residential entity would be classified underneath one of these 46 land use categories that the consultants proposed. So moving on to that, these are the rates that were proposed initially by them. What you see there is you have your residential at 6.75 and 6. They're at the bottom, and then in the non-residential categories, there's basically 6 tiers there, ranging from $25 to $75. That multiplier table off to the right, and ultimately there's an annual revenue generation under these proposed rates of about $4.5 million. If you look at the residential generation, obviously it would be interesting to know what kind of the numbers are behind it. So if you look for each one of those tiers in each one of those categories, the number of customers, the proposed rate there, kind of what a monthly and an annual revenue would be for each tier. And then we as staff wanted to kind of give council an insight into if we wanted to discuss or if they wanted to look at adjusting those rates in some manner, kind of what $1 would do on the residential side and what $5 would do on the non-residential side. Whether that's increasing by $1 or decreasing $1, that would be a plus or minus both monthly and annually there in that far right column. There were 3 entities that the consultants carved out as far as large land use categories based on San Angelo specifically. The airport, Goodfellow Air Force Base, and the San Angelo Stock Show and Rodeo Association. So based on a calculation and a methodology that they had come up with for those 3 entities, those would be billed on an annual basis at $3,500 per month, $3,000 and $1,050 respectively as proposed.
Talk about those because of the large land mass that they are. If you'll go back to that, the question mark is, okay, so how would that compare to, for example, the school, SAISD, as well as Angelo State University, because they too would be considered large
Yes, ma'am.
land.
Yes, ma'am. We have a slide further on where we'll visit with y'all to try to get some feedback from y'all on those, because the schools, they look at the schools a little differently, and so almost all of them charge like on a per student basis, and so again, we will look at that in a few more slides.
Sorry. The reason some of that would become an issue is because if you take a look at elementary school and middle schools, they don't drive, those students.
No, ma'am, but their parents do.
Their parents do, but, so that's the reason I asked too, is if you start taking and breaking it down into thought processes, those would be some of the things that you would ask.
Yes, ma'am.
Or think about.
And again, that's why we're looking this is not necessarily individuals, but looking at it as based on trip generation. And that's the key to this, is the trip generation, and what does that entity or what does that school or whatever it is, what do they, what does their trip generation look like? And so again, that's how we're basing this on. And so because whether it's an elementary school or a junior high, even though those children aren't driving, if y'all been around one of the schools at drop-off time or pickup time, it's amazing how many vehicles are out there to pick up the kids. And so, and of course, and then the bus is also traveling on the roads as well too, again, generating that degradation of the pavement. So, and so some of the other components that we looked at in this, and of course we want council's feedback on this, are some of these things, you know, and just to kind of let you know, we are going to create a grievance process for this, not necessarily about what it is or how much it is. That's a council decision. But again, when we look at as from staff and or our consultants, we do not necessarily know, Mayor, we don't know what Brenda Gunter Inc. is. And so it's not descriptive, and so we don't necessarily know what land use category to put that in. And so we are going to have those where we're going to have people come say, hey, I'm not in this group, I need to be in this group. And so a lot of those, and so that's what the grievance process is for, is so they can come tell us that, hey, I don't belong down here in this one, I belong up here in this one. And so we'll do that. And of course, most of these, it will be resolved at the department review level. And so, but if it escalates above that, we are going to have the city auditor review it and provide feedback and guidance there. And if that is still unsatisfactory to the citizen or the business, then we would have the city manager as the final process in the review of that. And so to do it again, we believe that almost all, if I can't see that you know, once we get to know what the business is and how it acts and what it looks like, and base it on that information that we receive. I don't know why it would ever have to escalate beyond the department review, but again, just in case it does, there is a process in place. Also want to really emphasize this, is that these monies would be in a separate fund, and they would be restricted to basically the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and maintenance of roadway elements. And those elements are, you know, the road base, the road itself, curb and gutter, sidewalks, traffic signals, pedestrian elements, all of those things would, and that's all that these funds could be used for. They couldn't be used in water, they can't be used in general services, they can't be used anything but on the streets themselves. And so,
Which the other issue that I think we should emphasize here is that that would also not change, and we wouldn't eliminate the dollars that's in operations and or the funds that we already put into street construction. As we said, seal coatings, 3.5 million, 500,000 for potholes, et cetera. So we're saying that we would continue funding those as they're funding. So let's say we would put $4 million into the budget for, like we have been doing, right?
correct.
So we're not taking that away. What we're doing is adding
This would be in addition
this,
to,
in
correct,
addition
ma'am.
to it, so that we could do it faster, quicker, more efficiently, and less costly.
Correct. And we would not mingle these funds, these dedicated funds, we would not mingle these with our traditional operation and maintenance funds. They would still remain separate. And so the accounting and the accountability would be there, that we are using these funds where they're supposed to be used, which is on the streets. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody understands that there will be no commingling of this fund with any of the other ones as well too. So, and then again, as we visited about earlier, assigning it to the existing utility bill, again, to help with that enforcement and the collection of the bill. Again, it gives the city ability to actually collect and also work through our collection system that we have with the utility statement. Some of the things that we need to consider as we're looking at this is, as we look into the future, we all know that everything, the cost of doing business goes up yearly. And here lately, it's been going up exponentially. Our dollars don't go as far as they used to. So at some time in the future, if y'all decide to implement a program like this, one of the things we would know is kind of what would you want to look at from an escalation period? Would we want to, staff would recommend doing it on a percentage basis, and whether we base that on some consumer pricing index, a municipal price index or cost index, something or one that's related to actual road maintenance itself, one of the indices that are out there with a percentage cap on top of that. Would we want to look at something like that? Would we just want a fixed annual rate at some, whatever that is, at 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is, kind of what we would consider a general inflation rate? And then also, would you want to start that type of rate escalation year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5? How far out would you want to take the program before we actually started looking at increasing this fee to accommodate for basically the inflation that we know we're going to see over time? So that's something to consider as we're looking into this and hope to get feedback at some point. Another thing that staff would recommend is also for a low income accommodation is to utilize what we're using with our water utility currently, is adding funding into the low income assistance program through the Concho Valley Action Agency. And that way, if people are having problems paying their bills or covering their bills or the cost of this, is that they can seek assistance from this agency that works with low-income people on a regular basis to help them pay their bills. And so we would recommend that as well. Again, would like y'all's feedback on that as well too. One of the things that we wanted to bring to your attention is the apartments. When you look at apartments, when you have 100 units or 200 units or 250 units times $6, that starts becoming very burdensome up front. And a lot of those apartments and people like that, they're in 6-month or year-long contracts, and so they're locked in. And so for them to absorb that cost all at once would be considerable. And so we want to make sure that but we would, as staff, recommend a phased approach to where maybe we do 50% year 1 and then 100% year 2 to allow them to build into their contracts as those contracts come up for renewal to help cover those costs on the apartments as well too. And then finally, when we start talking about schools, and again, we look at schools, SAISD, TLCA, Cornerstone, ASU, Howard, et cetera, all of the schools. When we look at that, most everyone else is charging a per student basis instead of a flat per campus or whatever, because everything and everybody varies, and so by size. And so they've looked at a per student basis. And so when we looked at this, kind of to give y'all, basically let y'all look at this and kind of give us direction as to what y'all feel is appropriate for schools, we looked at anywhere from 60 cents per student to $1.15 per student, and you can kind of see what the annual revenue generation would be for that. And this is based on Snaresville ISD's enrollment numbers this last year. So that's kind of what, for Snaresville ISD, that's kind of what this would look at. And when we look at that, these type of dollars, those are pretty significant for somebody to immediately absorb into a budget. And so we would also recommend a phased approach for our schools out there as well too. 50% year 1, 100% year 2. If council has other ideas, we would love to hear those as well too. But again, to allow these schools and people time to build this fee into their budgets, because again, that's a pretty substantial dollar figure just to all of a sudden be plugging into a budget one day, especially if they're on a different fiscal time frame than we are as well. And with that, I think that kind of wraps up the funding and the fee proposal. So again, we would love y'all's feedback and any questions, comments, and
I'll start with Larry. Do you have questions or comments for them?
Are there any entities that are exempt from this?
As it currently stands, Larry, no, we're not proposing any entities that are exempt per se, but again, that's at council's discretion and consideration. So we would look for that feedback from council, but these numbers are taking into account all residential and non-residential entities currently.
That includes the city. I mean,
Right.
The city departments or city entities, we would all, within our different funds, would also contribute to this as well, too. Because we are trip generators as well.
Karen?
The implication is that this does not require voter approval. Can you speak to that, please?
No, ma'am, this does not require voter approval. This can be adopted as an ordinance by city council.
Lucy?
I just have a quick question on this property tax that we had gotten approved.
Talk into your mic,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry. This property tax rate that we had approved, that .006 for the street fund, is that going to be combined with this rate that we have, so it's all gonna go in one pot?
Yes, ma'am, that dedicated source, since it was dedicated by council to specifically only be used on streets, that could actually be, I mean, you would see it in the revenue is two different line items, but we would keep that in the same fund since it is a dedicated funding source for streets only.
Thank you.
Harry?
I like the part where you talked about being a dedicated fund that could only be used for street, because I've heard a lot of citizens in the last couple of weeks think that we're just taking money and it can be used for whatever. So if we make this decision and it's passed as an ordinance, that part I hope will be in there, that we can say, hey, it goes into a separate fund that can only be used for road maintenance and road construction.
Yes, sir, and I know Teresa has been looking at this some as well too, and unfortunately she's not here today. But I believe there's state law that also has it restricted as well too. So it wouldn't only just be in our ordinance, but I believe for us to be able to pass an ordinance to collect a fee such as this and name it a street use fee, that there's state law that restricts the use of those funds as well too.
Thank you.
Tom?
So Harry touched on that, and I think we'll roll this one over to Brandon. Brandon, there's a couple people here that brought up the fact that they thought there might be some legal issue of putting a fee on our water bill. Can you expand upon that? I know we've kind of given you a little foreshadow that question was
Yeah,
coming.
so the way that both the administrative code and the water code define a water and sewer utility, it has a whole laundry list of entities that are encompassed in that, but it actually excludes municipal corporations. So I believe it could be on the water bill, but the other point about the commingling the funds, we want to ensure that it's not a revenue generator that exceeds the cost of the program or providing those services. Otherwise, it could be an unauthorized tax. So so long as there's a reasonable basis for the fee, then we're good there.
And my summary on this, just, we're all throwing out opinions on this. I love the fact that nobody escapes this. All right. Everybody pays, everybody shares, and there's no way around it. And I think if all of our tax structures were based like this, we would never be in this type of situation. And so I'll be the first one to say I like the way this thing's going. I don't think it's a burden, but I do like the fact that you have already established a process if there's a grievance in here to pursue. But I'm certainly open to anything further, and I'm very encouraged by the process.
Tommy?
I'm going to echo what Karen said much earlier in the conversation. I do like the concept. The timing is of question to me because of everything that's going on. I don't know how we deal with that other than say we're going to bring this back in 6 months, a year, whatever. I don't know what that is. But the timing, at least for me, it just doesn't feel good, doesn't feel right to me. And I want to chase a rabbit just a minute, and this is going to be a real chasing a rabbit. Shane mentioned signals, and there has been an issue that has arisen, and I'm not going to go down this path because I think it would be far more appropriate at the discussion of the CIP. But there has been a signal that has been mentioned to be removed that I think we need to discuss that. But you mentioned signal, so I wanted to throw that out. I'm thinking the more appropriate time to talk about that is when we talk about the CIP later in June.
No, I tell you what we need to do, and we'll talk about that in a minute with Shane, not right now, I think, Tommy, because I think the idea was that it was announced that that traffic signal was going to be pulled today, that temporary light was going to be pulled today. So I think the issue is we need to talk to Shane outside this meeting today and say there's too many people who are opposed to that temporary light being moved from Knickerbocker and Twin Mountain. And we need to leave it there. And then at some point, go ahead and get that put into the CIP, but we need to address the issue of not pulling it right now.
Well, I think it's
So-
the signal is in the CIP. We just need to find instruct the staff to find the funding. So again, that's another day, another discussion. But when you said signals a minute ago, it triggered my thought process. So
So if they're out there moving it now, stop them.
They're not moving it. They just bag the heads. There's a process for moving even temporary signals, and so we just started that process. The trailers are still there. So
There's a lot of opposition to it. We'd like to see it stay there for a while, and we'll deal with the CIP later. Yeah, okay. Separate from this.
Speed.
separate from this, yes.
Yeah, I think that there might be some people in the audience today who wanted to add comment on this issue. If you are here for that purpose, please come forward, state your name, your district, city council member in your district, and offer your comments if you are here.
Just hit start and stop.
Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you.